Good morning. My name is Deidre Walker. I'm the audit manager for the internal audit function here in IFAD. And it's my pleasure today to launch this session where we'll be exploring the soft side, so looking at ethics, protection, and inclusion in ICT4 evaluation and tools. So I have the honor today to present to you our two presenters for this session. We have Mr. Michael Bamberger, and he is a sociologist who's been working in the development, evaluation, and gender analysis field for over 50 years and has been working in over 50 developing countries. He has a particular focus of his work on social inclusion, identifying unintended outcomes, and particularly those that affect women in development programs. He's been working on assessing strengths and weaknesses of how ICTs are used in development and evaluation, and most recently has completed a report for the UN Global Pulse and Rockefeller Foundation on integrating big data into monitoring and evaluation of development programs. And he's also been for more than 20 years with the World Bank as monitoring and evaluation advisor and training coordinator. And then also today here we have with us Linda Raftree, and she is an independent consultant that works on supporting strategy, program design, research, and technology in international development initiatives. She's worked with a number of organizations, Merle Tech, which works with doing events and discussions on IT-enabled evaluation, and the Girl Effect Mobile, which is does work on digital safety and security, and also working with the Rockefeller Foundation Evaluation Office on ICTs in evaluation, and many other activities. As you will see also, both of them have some description in the documentation that's provided you. So I won't take too long here. I just want to let you know this will be a session where you'll get to move around a little bit. So we'll be doing some work that is allowing people to have some discussion towards the end. So let's launch right into the session here and get it underway. Linda, over to you.
So if we can have everybody just kind of get up, you can leave your stuff on your seats, and we're going to go stand over in that side of the room where the flip charts are. Fit on the scale. So we'll read out a statement if you are on the side 1 of the statement, side 5 of the statement, or somewhere in between. So to give you an example, one being what I'll mention when I tell you what the statement is. Yeah. So the first statement is very easy. Do you work in a small agency, number 1, or do you work in a very, very large agency, number 5?
Small at this end and a large at the other.
Do you want to ask some questions?
No, go ahead.
Okay, somebody from the small side, how do you determine small, or what's the size of your agency or your organization?
Lending size, so less than $1 billion a year.
Okay. Less than $1 billion.
Okay, so he was thinking in terms of funding. Okay, anybody else over here? Did you interpret small in another way?
Just a one-person company, so that's smaller.
You're a big guy, so.
Yeah, so it makes up for it, right? How about somebody over here? You're kind of in the middle. How do you think of your mid-sized agency?
I work for UN Habitat. Of course, it is in terms of subsistence and whatever, it is a global program in all countries. But in terms of resources, it is a small program with a budget over the year of about 300 million.
Thank you. Anyone from one of these large agencies want to comment?
Sure, I'll do that. So I work for the World Bank Group, so obviously I need to speak because we are the biggest sort of gorilla in the room. People have referred to me as a 600-pound gorilla, so please do see the larger size rather than my physical body. The World Bank Group has 16,000 people. It works in the public sector with the World Bank, private sector with IFC and MEGA. It thinks of itself as the key leader in development, and so that puts naturally a lot of pressure on us as the independent evaluation group. First of all, to give them fair assessments, informative assessments, but also to hold them accountable to being that fantastic leader that they think of themselves.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is, do you use more traditional sort of paper data gathering tools over number one? And are you, like using all the latest technology and big data and drones and Internet of Things and all that kind of stuff? Maybe speak to your organization as a whole. Yep. The organization overall. Yeah, not necessarily you as a person, but sort of your organization. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I have my own data visualization company, so I don't really collect data with drones and stuff, but I try to use the latest technology as possible, so yeah. Well, for instance, visualizations that use the graphical processor of your computer in the browser, and that's something that's, well, only recently supported by browsers. So, in that sense, software, latest technology.
Thank you. Anybody who's kind of here in the middle? Want to talk about what your agency is doing? And if you are doing something different than your agency, you can also say, well, I'm really, really innovative and my organization isn't, or the opposite. There are these crazy people in my organization, they're doing all this crazy stuff I completely disagree with. That's also totally fine. Anybody?
So at British Fund, we use a mix of manual and automated data gathering. The automated data gathering looks at data published in open data standards like IATI. The manual survey is what we do to verify that the automated tracker got it right, and also when people don't publish open data, and then we go and look at their documents manually. So we do both.
It's a little bit of a mix. Anybody over here, number two?
Well, what we are using is normally quite normal analysis. In addition, for instance, we are using business intelligence, so especially intelligence of our ERP system. We are using, well, let's say, worldwide data transfer, and also, well, let's say, transfer of photos, films, and so on. So for us, it's more the communication aspect.
Okay, great. I'm going to go to the next question. Do you consider that you are using data to support decisions on projects and implementation, or using data to support policy and advocacy and like SDGs and stuff like that? So over here, if you're doing it more to understand very direct decision making, and over there if you're using it to inform like really big policy angles on things. Well, and if you're not using data to make decisions at all, that's quite likely as well. So you can go and stand, I don't know, maybe over here. Yeah, you do both ends? Okay. Okay, come, we can have an other. We can have an other, yeah. Okay, let's talk to somebody that's kind of in the middle.
With you in Habitat, and I feel we use data for both processes and policy. Yeah, so that's why.
Somebody over here, how do you use data to inform very concrete project decisions or program decisions? Anybody?
So we sometimes have the hard task of evaluating a project which is supposed to have a second, third follow-on phase, so to speak. So as the evaluation office, we are asked to evaluate the previous phase so that it can feed into the successive phase. So yeah, and we are under quite a bit of pressure from both ends of the aisle, you know, to say that, oh, you know, can please give us a positive assessment, you know, it's almost, you know, like, you know, almost, you know, and on the other end of the aisle, no, you know, it's a terrible project, you know, we need to divert it there. So it's those kind of decisions, but more specifically for projects rather than for policies, at least in my case specifically.
Thank you. And how about closer to the policy side?
Yeah, thank you. We are producing evaluations for the Minister of Foreign Affairs for policy and strategic purposes, so I suppose it's either 5 or 4. You know. It depends. Not big policies, so 4.
Okay. And I'm just... Okay. Somewhere there? Yeah, so.
In WFP, we had gender eval. Okay, we had a gender evaluation or evaluation of gender policy, which informed the updating and revision of WFP gender policy.
Okay, and last question. Stand over here if you think ICTs are not solving our fundamental challenges with M&E. And stand over here if you think that ICTs are resolving fundamental challenges with M&E. Are. Are not? Are. Okay, anybody want to talk about that? Anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to mention why you're standing where you're standing? Yeah, you've already spoken, so I'm going to pass over to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe I am standing here. I'm from ICO, the Dutch Development Organization. What I think is very interesting of ICT is that you have a very could have a short learning loop. So I'm focusing specifically on monitoring, and I would really plea for getting data much quicker back to the practitioners and back to the target groups. I think there's really a large area we can win. So I think that's why I'm a bit more this side, because I really think for that it can be very useful if we make proper use of it, not only collect the data, but also make visualizations and make sure that the data is properly analyzed and get back to the real target groups, those who really need it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
ICTs are very useful in methodologies where we use surveys, but now with other methodologies of collecting views through groups and whatever, not ICTs.
Maybe we'll take one more person, and then we're going to move on to our next section of the workshop or the session. Yeah.
In some cases, ICTs are useful, but as we are lending mostly to the private sector in a quite conservative, traditional way, we don't see very broad application of ICTs.
Thank you. Sure, okay. So, sorry, last question is, I have limited familiarity with big data approaches, and I am very familiar with big data approaches over here. As individuals for this one. Okay. Okay, maybe one of you. Yeah,
In a previous life, I worked with CDRs, call detail records, used machine learning to see how mobile technologies, use of mobile money could make an impact on poor and remittances in sub-Saharan Africa. So I guess I know a bit about analyzing those really big data.
Thank you. Anybody from in here?
So I'm in Asian Development Bank, and I primarily work in the urban sector. So in order to understand the sort of trend or movement in the urban sector, I think it's important for me to understand how I can effectively use the technology. But also, I've been sent to a training in a university for a short, brief time to learn about it. But the more I learn about it, the application of big data to a very conventional institution like ADB is a bit challenging, because there's not much audience inside the institution to understand the effectiveness of this. So I'm trying to learn.
So in IEG, we've actually used big data. So 4 years ago, we did an evaluation of forestry, and some people might think like, oh my God, what do you do? There's satellite data on forest fires that's available for free. So you don't even have to pay for it. So we used it there. We're doing right now an evaluation on pollution. Again, whichever evaluation we do, we look for any kind of data sources, whether it's big data, whether it's impact evaluation, systematic reviews, et cetera, to bring that all together with our more traditional review of project documents, policies, et cetera, in order to sort of like deepen the sort of evidence base that we have. But we don't rely on any one source just as a simple, this is the truth and the only truth. It really is a matter of combining them all together.
Anyone over on this side want to comment? Yeah?
In the evaluation function in Habitat, we rely on this data in projects, at times in isolated databases, and whether that is big data, we call it really small data, which most of the time even is missing. To get it is very difficult. So we think we are using small data, not big data.
Well, I'm clearly in the middle. So actually, I must admit that part of the reason for organizing this was kind of to learn, because I pretend that I know, but I really don't. But all that aside, I think I do understand, and I think within the organization IFAD itself, there is an awareness of what big data is, broadly speaking, but then the problem really comes as to how you use it. What do you make of it? How do I use even satellite imagery, like the most freely available kind of big data source that there is? So even that probably holds true for me as well.
It's funny, it just reminded me at one of our conferences we had in DC, somebody said big data is like teen sex, that everyone talks about it, everyone says they're doing it, but no one really has any experience. So.
So, John, we're going to go on to the next. Now, just to mention very briefly yesterday, a recent study estimated that only about 50% of evaluators feel they have some understanding of what big data is, and only about 10% were actually using it. Now, this was a study on LinkedIn of people who were members of the American Evaluation Association group or the European Evaluation, but I think it's reflected in quite a few other studies. And just one final point, I've been surprised how suspicious many evaluators are of big data. I was giving a presentation at the UNDP Evaluation Office, and I was asked to do a very brief presentation on big data. As soon as I started, most of the evaluators jumped on me and said, we don't want to use big data. This is sponsored by the commercial interests. It's exploiting the poor. And it was just a very negative. Not everybody thinks that, but it's a very interesting question of if we believe that big data is going to become more central to the way that programs are planned, monitored, it's going to be a big challenge for evaluators to get up to speed so that they're involved in helping design these systems. Otherwise, we're going to find in a few years' time that maybe evaluations are going to be designed by data analysts who say, all we need to do is have a lot of numbers, that's it. We don't need all of this stuff going out and wasting time talking to people. We don't want stories. So it's going to be a big challenge for evaluators to catch up. Well, that's one hypothesis we'll come back to in our discussion group. So.
Okay, so we're going to do very quick presentations about some of the core themes around the soft side. And when we say soft side, basically we're talking about all of the stuff that is in addition to the hardware. Everybody always, comes to us and is like, oh, I want to do feedback, community feedback. Like, what tool should I use? It's like, whoa, let's go way back here and let's start way back at the beginning, because you probably can't solve all your problems with a tool if you don't have everything else in place. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit right now. So please follow, join us.
Okay. Yes, so we'll start with the first part of the presentation. Mr. Michael will lead us into that, about 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll have a second presentation from Linda, and then after that there'll be some more time for questions, and we'll do that at the end of the presentations.
So, good morning, everybody. I'm going to give a few of the potentially positive outcomes of big data and ICT, and then Linda's going to talk about some of the challenges, and then we'll ask you to divide into groups and give us your perspectives on what you think. So just very briefly, thank you. So just very briefly, a few of the potential benefits. ICT and big data are potentially a two-way street. They can provide information to and from local communities, which is a bottom-up focus. They can also provide information to policymakers and implementing agencies in a relatively cheap and fast way, which is the top-down benefits. The challenge is to make sure that you're covering both of these. This should be a two-way street, and if these are just seen as a cheap way for decision makers to get information without having to waste time going out to villages and talking to people, we will have failed in using these new tools as a way of promoting empowerment, of giving voice to low-income groups. So although people talk a lot about these being a way to give voice to poor and vulnerable groups, this doesn't happen magically, and in many organizations it doesn't necessarily happen at all. If you go to a lot of presentations on big data, this is really great, it's so cheap. You can sit in your office and learn everything you need to know about poor people without having to waste time going out and talking to them. So it's not magically going to empower people, even though people talk a lot about that. So this is a first strong potential benefits, but also a potential challenge. One of the big benefits of, I'll use, say, big data, but this also includes ICT, is it provides access to a much wider range of information, both for evaluation agencies and for local communities and other decision makers. It makes information easier to access, and it can also be accessed in a more culturally appropriate form. It can become available cheaper and faster, which is really critical in many contexts. It can also increase the sample size, so you can get disaggregated data. One of the big problems with sample surveys, the cost of collecting data is so high, you calculate the minimum possible size that you can have for your survey, which means you often can't disaggregate data and understand differences between different groups. So being able to increase the sample size is potentially a critical benefit. Also, it provides access to new kinds of information, behavioral information, process, attitudinal information. So it potentially provides a much deeper understanding of what is actually happening during project implementation, during the kinds of activities which happen in communities as a response to projects. So potentially it opens up a range of new kinds of information. It also provides longitudinal data. Caroline was mentioning the example of some of the studies of forestry and so on, where you now have longitudinal data sets, so you can look at changes over time. It provides contextual information. You can look at a much wider range of factors which are affecting programs operate, which previously was too expensive to collect. Then the third point, there's a number of potential benefits specifically for target populations. It provides actionable information on things like health programs or agricultural information. So it provides a lot of real-time information to different groups that they can use, so it's actionable. It also potentially allows communities to communicate with decision makers, which hasn't happened a lot in many previous situations. And it also provides tools for holding implement agencies accountable, which is a major potential development. You can actually have a record of what they're promising to do, and you can provide feedback on whether they're doing this. You can actually hold them account. You're supposed to be spending so much budget in this community. You haven't done it. So accountability is potentially a big tool. Then Linda has done a great deal of work on this, empowering girls and women. In many cultures, women have less voice, less opportunity to express their views and concerns. And a lot of these tools can potentially do this, the cell phones and a range of other tools. We have to be, how much? 2 minutes, yeah. We have to be careful. There's a lot of statements about how cell phones empower women. You need to dig a little bit deeper and also see some of the downside, which, you know, men feel they're losing authority, and you can have an increase in domestic violence, so on. But it's potentially powerful. Then also it can provide confidential communication tools. UNICEF, for example, has a tool where children can provide feedback on the schools, incredible things that they're prepared to talk about, of having to trade sex for exam results, which you wouldn't get through any other kinds of tools. Potential benefits for vulnerable and voiceless groups. It can give them a voice. It can also show that they exist, because many of these vulnerable groups are invisible. They don't appear in surveys, in samples. So just that they exist. And then one really critical thing is it enables people to find out about projects before they begin. Somebody's going to build a road through your community. Somebody's going to put up a school. Previously, a lot of agencies tried to keep this secret, so it was a fait accompli. You didn't know there was going to be a road through your community until the bulldozers arrive. Now, people know about this ahead of time, and they have an opportunity to respond. It also a very powerful tool for protecting vulnerable groups in emergency situations, tracking people who have to migrate because of conflict, because of a famine, locating people in earthquakes. Then finally, just to remind us that none of these things happen magically. You have to have a very clear policy that you're going to be using these tools as a participatory method. It requires a commitment all the way up and down the organization. So these tools will become inclusive. Otherwise, there's a danger that people talk about empowerment and voice, but in fact they become extractive in that they're just used by decision makers to collect information and make decisions about the target communities without them even knowing it's happening necessarily. So these are potentially very exciting, powerful tools, but it needs a very strong commitment from the organization so that these things will actually happen. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. And now we'll move to the other side of the picture, which are some of the challenges of these tools.
Thank you, Michael. So there are a number of areas that you can divide some of the challenges and barriers in that I think it's helpful for thinking through when you're planning to integrate ICTs into your existing work, or when you're thinking about what can ICTs enable you to do that you couldn't do before. And those are, for me, kind of the two ways of thinking about using ICT in your evaluation or in really any of your organizational work. So one of the areas is operational. So you really need to be thinking, ICT does not automatically mean that you're going to have less staff and you're going to save money. Sometimes you have to retrain people. You have to invest in tools and systems. You need to think, as we heard on yesterday, is it worth investing for a one-off baseline study, or really making smart decisions about where you want to invest, and remembering that you are going to have a lot of different types of costs potentially. You might have to hire new staff. What does that mean for staff that may have skills that are less relevant? And then thinking about the total cost of ownership of that particular tool. So we're seeing a lot of tools that are being promoted, or we're encouraged to use a lot of tools, but we need to think about what does that tool cost over the long range. What's the total cost of ownership in terms of keeping people trained, in terms of any type of fees for keeping those tools updated. All that type of stuff needs to be thought of before you kind of jump into it. There are methodological issues that we need to think about. Forgetting to do my slides. Methodological issues. Some of these tools resolve old problems and create new problems. So it's not something to just easily jump into. We need to be thinking about really taking a look at what might some of these new things be. So we might be bringing in new biases, as Michael spoke about, who's accessing, using, and controlling ICTs. And this is both within an organization, within a community, within a family, within a government. There are differing levels of skills and different levels of access and control over technologies. And so thinking about all of that when you're integrating ICTs. Who has the confidence to express opinions? There's this idea that everybody has a mobile phone, so everyone's going to be texting us and telling us what's wrong in their community. Well, if no one's ever listened to you in your life before, no one's ever told you you have a right to speak and to complain about something, why would you ever send a random telephone number a complaint about the fact that your water's not working? Maybe it's better to just walk down the road and talk to the water board and see if they can do something about fixing it. Maybe that's more effective. So really thinking through, how some of these things are working. There's aspects of, as we spoke a lot yesterday, around algorithms, who's left out of big data algorithms, who's creating these algorithms, how are the algorithms biased, and what are the errors within the algorithms that may be causing harm to people in the long run. And that's been coming up quite a lot in terms of insurance companies collecting data about people's health. Potentially in the future, that data is going to be used to charge some people more money and other people less money. And maybe it's the most vulnerable people who are going to be charged more for their insurance because of they're not walking as much on their Fitbit or something like that. We need to be thinking about samples and whether our design is rigorous and valid. So if we're trying to do an online survey or a mobile survey, are the people that are answering that survey a representative sample of the people that we actually want to talk to, or are we already separating out a certain group of people who tend to fill out mobile surveys, or people who tend to go online and do surveys online? That's already making your sample a little bit skewed. And then, are we becoming tech-driven and quant-driven? Are we losing our face-to-face contact with people? We've heard quite a lot about what you can hear in a voice when someone's talking to you, what you can see on someone's face when you're talking with them directly. There are pros and cons to that. Sometimes you feel like taking the evaluator out of the picture, you might be able to get a more honest decision, but we need to know ahead of time or test that out. There's ethics aspects, which is the third area. Thinking about privacy, safety, security, and that's a continuum. It's not just thinking about how are we keeping data safe and secure, but it's about what data are we collecting? Are we collecting it in private settings? Are we selling that data or allowing private sector companies to access the data that we're collecting from vulnerable populations? Are some people risking and other people benefiting? In terms of, are we collecting data for our organization's benefit? Is that data really providing a benefit back to the people that we're supposed to be working with? Are we following legal frameworks? We've heard yesterday about the GDPR, which is the European data regulations that are coming in. Those are starting to become the basis for a lot of national level laws. So we need to be thinking about the legal aspects, child protection aspects. Is it okay to collect data about children under the age of 18 digitally? Do we know? Have we thought about it? Do we have the capacity and skills to secure data across all levels? And that means within our local partners. So we might have a great database system that's very secure in our organization, but if we're working with partners, do local partners also have that data security in mind? Do they have that privacy in mind? Are we destroying data if we're no longer using it? Are we aggregating it to a point that we can get rid of raw data so we're not holding massive amounts of data on very vulnerable people that could potentially be leaked or hacked into or involuntarily or voluntarily shared? Behavior and organizational change, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but it does, like any type of massive change in an organization, as we digitize, there are new skills that are needed. Are people signing on and pretending that they know about ICTs because they want to appear to be innovative and they want to keep their jobs? Do they really know what they're doing? All these things are important to think about. And then sectoral, are we trying to take a health model of data collection and apply it to women's empowerment? Are we looking at, what needs to happen in a humanitarian or a conflict situation versus what kinds of tools might be appropriate in a development setting? So really thinking about what are the different risks and what are the different aspects that we need to think about across different sectors. And then lastly is a technical aspect, which I've left for last because it's the one that we think we need to know about first. The technical piece, really, you need to think about it at the beginning because if you're not a technical person, you may not know what the possibilities are, but you shouldn't start off with a tool and say, how can I use this tool? It should be more, what am I trying to do? What data do I need? What are my questions? What am I trying to answer? Where is there already existing data that's being collected? What data is missing? All those different questions that evaluators normally ask, they don't really change that much when you're using technology. And then there are lots of questions about, do you build your own system? Is there a system that's already useful for what you're trying to do? Where's the best investment? What kinds of training are needed? And then who's going to manage that process? What happens to the equipment after you've collected data? Are you going to give people tools to collect data? Are you going to ask them to use their own tools, their own phones, and collect data on their phones? There are all these different decisions that are made at the technical level. And then thinking about levels of connectivity and suitability of tools for the particular context. There's a lot of literature out there. There are a lot of existing research that's been done that you can really tap in to think about some of these aspects before you get going on a project or on an evaluation design.
Okay, thank you both. Sorry to have to sort of rush you through that. We're trying to make sure we respect our time. And now there's going to be another activity, so there can be some discussion and questions on this. And you'll lead this, right, Linda? Okay, all right. We'll move on to the next.
So what we wanted to have you do is to split up into maybe, let's see, 1, 2, 3, maybe 6 groups. And then we just have a few questions that we wanted you guys to discuss with each other, just to kind of expand on some of the ideas that we spoke about. So if you want to just congregate kind of where you are, you don't have to move the chairs or anything, but if you can sit near a group of another 4 or 5 people, I'm going to give you some questions. Then we'll discuss those questions for about 10 minutes and have a few minutes to just feedback some of the key points that you've discussed in your group.
If you could just take one more minute to sort of wrap up your conversations, then we'll have a summary session. Okay. Okay, can I ask you to finalize your sentences where you are, and then we'll like to hear from each group. Okay, I think Michael's gonna come and ask everyone for some ideas to wrap up. Sorry?
It's always the most interesting part. So, okay, that's on. Yes.
There you go.
So, you can stay where you are. As lunch is next, we thought we could go on till about 25 to. If anybody has to sneak out, that's fine. But we'd like to squeeze just a few more minutes. So what we'd like each group to do.
Sorry,
is,
excuse me. We're going to start wrapping up now. Yeah. If we can all join in.
So Linda used to be a school teacher. She has some chalk she'll start throwing at people if they don't. So what we'd like to ask is, in each group, 2 people each just mention one issue which came up in the group. So we know we're not going to cover everything, and then this will just allow us a couple of minutes to wrap up at the end. And in the handout, we have on the last page a number of resources with some tools and techniques that you can go to for more information. So apologies, we don't have another hour to continue the discussion. But so we'll start with this group, and if there's 2 people who'd like to each just mention one of the issues that you came up with. Sorry, we don't have time to go through all of the issues, but just who would like to give the first? And we'll give you the mic so you can.
So I think one of the first issues which came up was that really a lot of times IT vendors and development professionals speak very different languages, and what the IT vendors want out of giving you the technology is different from what we as development professionals and our end beneficiaries want out of using it. And we discussed the example of Safaricom in Kenya and how there were instances of them doing something. So yeah.
If another person would like to give a second.
I don't know. Yes, we also talked about IT security and data protection. So of course it depends in which context we are working. In which countries we are working, what official regulations there are, but also what internal regulations there are in each organization. So are we allowed to use certain providers of IT solutions, etc.?
Thank you. So those are 2 important issues which I'm sure are going to be coming up again. So I won't try to summarize. We'll summarize at the end. So the second group, who would like to give a first?
Well, maybe I'll try. I had the impression that most of us in the group, in this fairly small group, were at a fairly early stage of application of these methods. So, well, maybe the World Food Program, for example, they already had acquired the drones, but they were not sure how they were currently being utilized. Yeah, so again, the impression was that most, not all of us, were at fairly early stages and that we were still experimenting with these new methods and sort of doing trial and error exercises, which seemed legitimate. Yeah, one possible solution at that stage might be to cooperate with others who already have an experience in this field, be it in development or outside of development, who have already done surveys and that sort of stuff, or big data analysis. That seems to be a strategy to deal with this.
Yes. As it was mentioned before, we also discussed that it's quite expensive to use those tools, that it takes a lot of time, so that perhaps it's not the best thing to have the offices of evaluation trying to test it and pilot it just for one go, for one evaluation, and have rather what would be like the operations department, like the operational side of the organizations, developing it, using it, and then maybe the evaluation could just, let's say, piggyback on that and use it.
So 2 very interesting organizational suggestions of sharing knowledge and how you test out. And as Linda had mentioned, the startup costs can be quite high. So just thinking of what is the best way of getting into that. So thank you. And the final group.
One of the challenges for the programs who work at global level and country level, we find that though there are these ICT systems to capture monitoring data, the challenge comes on compatibility of the data to the country level with data to global level. Most of the time at the country level, they are programming with a different system, delivering as one. To aggregate the information from the evaluation point of view to the global level as a specific becomes a challenge, because the system you are using globally is different at the country level.
There was the issue of privacy, but mainly also the issue of involvement of beneficiaries, whereby the ICT technology exists, but when planning, the beneficiaries are not coming into play. And then at the end, when now you need to evaluate, you're going down to the beneficiaries who were never involved, and most of the cases don't also have access to the technology you have deployed.
Were you part of the same group, or you were different?
Yeah, in our group, there was a question or issue of protection of data in conflict and emergency contexts, and the challenge related to that, and how or what we can do as organizations to deal with it.
One more comment?
Okay, one more, well, if you allow me 2 more comments. One is really the question of verification of data, because fake data lead to wrong results. And it's very, very important to triangulate or to verify. And the other one was really the question of how to deal with malicious provision of data, especially when you mentioned this question of schools and pupils. At the end of the day, you can ruin the reputation of a person, a school, or a country.
So thank you very much. And it's a very interesting range of topics. So I'll pass back to Linda for just a few quick summary before we leave.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that I've been recently working on a literature review of responsible data guidelines. And when we're thinking about responsible, it's everything from ensuring that your data has integrity, it's quality data, to ensuring that you're thinking about accountability and transparency of where the data is coming from, how it's being used, all of that. And then the aspect of privacy, security, and ethics. That should be coming out at some point soon. But I guess what I wanted to say is we're drawing a lot from organizations that already have privacy policies. The WFP has a really extensive one. I always get them confused. It's either IFRC or ICRC, one or the other, has a really, really extensive policy. Some organizations have very recently updated them because people need to be compliant with the GDPR. So there's a lot of information out there. It's just kind of all over the place, and it's kind of hard to consolidate it in your organization. But just to say there are resources that you can draw from to help you think further about some of these aspects.
I'd just like to say thank you to Michael and Linda for being here in IFAD today for this very important event, and I hope that but also the dynamics here of moving around in discussion has been a good way to open this discussion, which really has a lot of different facets to it. So thank you all for attending, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.